instead of me just posting a bunch of stuff in the Discord and then you're gonna have to read through all of it, I figured I'll just put together a quick video of what I've been finding here on the Apple debacle, right? So essentially, there's a few things, and it's quite interesting to go through. I'm going to try and go through it with you guys as quickly as possible. Hopefully, I get all the facts across, and then we can kind of make some decisions together, right? So I'm going to just bring this up. So essentially, what is happening currently, right, is you've got the Trump administration brought in a bunch of rules, and that then meant that Apple, let's just come over here. Let's see. Here we go. So Apple pledges to invest 500 billion towards the US economy and add 20,000 jobs as Trump tariff looms. So this is a pledge that's going to be taking place over the course of the next 4 years. Right now, in this conversation, I'm going to prove to you guys that Apple doesn't want to do this, right? Which is why they talk about this 500 billion and they talk about doing it over 4 years. That means that they don't actually have to do anything right now. They can delay it and be like, we're planning, and then wait for the midterm elections where Trump potentially loses the House or he loses some of his powers. And then they can be like, oh, actually, we don't really want to do this anymore, right? So now what's happening is Trump is trying to force that hand and push them to do it earlier. And that's what I think is going to be happening. Because if you go into having a look at what Apple's actually been doing in China, now historically, up until this point, Apple's been investing over here roughly $55 billion annually into Chinese factories, right, owned by third parties. Now, they've been also investing 50 million into education, into training staff, into making sure that the people in their supply chain are fully equipped with the skills they need. But none of that money is coming to the US economy, right? But then they're bringing in all the phones and they're then selling it. At the same time, Apple's financial head offices are actually in Ireland, which means that a lot of their finance office is that side where they have a deal, and they took a bunch of jobs to Ireland and went, okay, we will bring our finance hub over here, and then but we don't want to pay tax. So I think they pay like a really negligible percentage of tax. It's like 1% or something ridiculous. But every time you buy an iPhone or you buy this or you buy that, the majority of that money subsequently immediately leaves before midnight and goes to the finance office, and then they start paying taxes there. So they've been doing this over and over and over again, investing into countries like China, India, and Vietnam, right? And I'm pretty sure that because this is on the Apple website, the US included here is probably just most likely because a lot of this is just a puff piece, right? So this came out in 2022. And since then, you can see that 55 billion has been going into Chinese factories, okay? So now Apple's already made a significant investment into the Chinese markets. And even with that in mind, they're looking at moving, so they've been talking about moving some of that production across to India. And this is just coming out now, April, so last month. They're talking about moving their production from China to India, and they started investing heavily into the Indian market recently as well to bypass the tariffs that Trump was putting on China. Now, because of that, I think that's why Trump has come out and targeted Apple specifically to say, no, listen, dude, you can't just bypass this thing. The point of this tariff thing is to bring jobs to South Africa. You can't go take it to India. I need it in South Africa, which is kind of stupid because there's no low-cost labor in America, right? You can't just hire like low-cost labor, that's India, that's China. If you want to bring that labor force to America, you're going to have to significantly reduce the minimum wage in order to even make that partially viable, right? So what this conversation is doing is this tariff, I believe, is it's basically pushing Apple to the negotiating table to say, okay, look, we will bring some of this $500 billion that we've promised to invest over the next 4 years, and we'll start doing it now, right? You'll see in the Discord I posted there from the previous period that previous time that Trump was in power, they got to the table and eventually negotiated that the Mac would actually get done or put together in America in a specific factory, and then everything kind of like went to peace and everyone was happy again, right? Now Trump's calling them out on this and saying, you can't just tell me in the next 4 years you're going to do this thing, right? Because you're currently investing $55 billion every single year into China, right? Which proves that Apple has no interest whatsoever in moving their manufacturing to America. If you think about the tariff situation, it's essentially going to last 4 years, right? if the Republicans don't win the next election, then the Democrats are going to come in. And as soon as the Democrats come in, then they're just going to move the policy back to free trade, right? Which is their system of beliefs. And then all of these factories that Apple's now just invested heavily into in America are going to now mean that they're outpricing themselves in the market globally, because all of their competitors are still going to be now manufacturing in China and India and these places, and now their cost of production is going to be a hell of a lot lower. Plus, the $55 billion that they're putting into the Chinese manufacturing sector every single year is going to have been for nothing, right? Now, just looking at the way that they pledge it, you can see that this is not something that they're interested in delivering on. And you've been seeing a lot of promises from all these corporates. And if you go look at it, all of them are saying like over the next 4 years, over the next 5 years, you know, and then for year 1, year 2, until the midterms next year, they can be like, oh, we're planning. We're like, we're finding the right location. We're designing the building. We've started building this one for 5 million or that one for $10 million, you know, like, but nothing massive, nothing excessive, so that they can then just buy time until eventually there is more pushback against the tariffs, and subsequently they can move a bit away from that, and Trump gets, you know, put into a corner a little, and then the trade tariffs reduce, and then you get to this position where they can they're now competitive again with their Chinese operations, right? So I wanted to dig a bit more now that when I saw that they were putting 55 billion, right, into $55 billion every single year into the Chinese market. Plus, they're putting 50 million into education, right? Supplier employment development funds into essentially their supply chain, which is China, India, Vietnam, majority. The only US production that they really have is on that Mac Pro. So like you can imagine what percentage of it is actually coming to the US. And so I did a bit of digging, and I want to just say, and I found a list of the companies that Apple's currently investing into, right? And it's interesting to see that Apple doesn't actually own any percentage stake in any of these companies, right? So I wanted to figure out, like, I was wondering, what is it that Apple gets in return for this 55 billion? If they're not buying shares in the supply chain, what do they get in return, right? And I'm going to go through that, and at the end of it, then you can decide whether or not Apple's actually going to say yes to this guy, or if they're going to find a way to lobby against it and essentially find another way forward, which could take a lot longer. Right? Before we go into the suppliers, just want to have a look quickly at the Apple charts, right? So now this is the Apple stock price. So ever since going back now, I'm looking at the low from 2018 here. And if you look at you can see that pretty much that was the last time the price actually had a healthy retrace, right? Coming into the 618 off of that COVID scare, right? COVID scare brought Apple's price back to the 618. And ever since then, if I was to pull a fib on this chart from that low down here and take it to every single peak on the way up, you can see that price action has not had a 50% retrace from any of its highs, which means that a lot of this price action over here is actually overextended, significantly overextended. So that means that with this debacle that's currently rolling out, it wouldn't actually be a bad thing to see Apple come all the way back down to that $150 mark and come in and retest some of into that key area of support. So that means that potentially, if this thing takes a lot longer to play out, you could still see another 30% dip in Apple, right? As well, if Trump is going after Apple because they need them to kind of push forward and make some immediate commitments as to manufacturing, building manufacturing facilities locally in the States and bringing jobs locally to the States, not just I'll do it over the next X amount of years, and hopefully you lose some power before that happens, and then we can kind of change our mind, right? You might also see this taking place with other companies that are making similar promises, right? So keep an eye on that, because we are also moving into a long weekend here. And if some of that starts to roll out, especially within the sort of top 5, top 7 companies in the S&P 500, that's going to bring a lot more fear and panic into the space. And it's something to keep an eye on, right? So just before we've got when I go to a list of the I'm going to quickly go to a list of the companies that are in the Chinese. These are essentially the Chinese stocks. So Pegatron Corporation, this is the second largest. And then you've got Foxconn, right? Otherwise known as High Precision Industries. So this company is basically entirely, majority of this is going to be Apple, right? In fact, the bulk of this company's production, and it's a $200 billion a year company, the majority of this evaluation is actually coming out of manufacturing Apple phones, right? We're going to dig into that data now. So I just want you to see how we slowly but surely we're rolling over, and you can expect that this could continue to move towards the downside. You've got Pegatron as well, right? This one is up, still up, went up 380%, still up 236%, right? If you were to look at or yuan, went up 150%. If you were to look at Lux share did 700% to its highs, currently at its 50 level, right? Now, the interesting thing about some of these companies like Luxshare is when you dig into the information, let me see if I've got it here. That's not it. Let's see this one. There we go. Okay, so Luxshares, right, is currently ramping up its role on the iPhone assembly, right? Foxconn is the primary assembler of the iPhone, right? Their current annual revenue last year was $208 billion, market cap $83 billion. Like, this company pretty much is Apple in China, right? If you look at Pegatron, secondary side, that's 35 billion. So you've got an industry that's built in China that's currently turning $340 billion annual revenue, where I'd say the majority of this is coming from producing Apple phones, right? When you ask yourself kind of, what does my $55 billion per annum buy me in America, in development in China, okay? It buys control, but not shares. Essentially, when you come into that question, say, what does Apple actually get for their $50 billion a year, right? This is what they're getting: exclusive priority capacity and priority access. They secure dedicated production lines, entire floors, or even entire factories that just produce those Apple phones. They've got an iPhone city in Tsingtao, right, which is basically entirely devoted to Apple operations. Apple enters a multi-year manufacturing contracts, right? So they're locking in pricing, delivery times, quality standards. This is how they've been able to sustain their share price, because they know what their costs are going to be for the next 5 years. Now imagine when all of that comes into question, where now you have to say, well, now I have to rebuild facilities. I have to change my labor costs. I have to reinvest locally. I can't now rely on the 55 billion that I spent last year. I have to find another 100 billion or 125 billion that I promised to spend in America this year, and I can't delay it anymore. So what that does is that puts Apple in a very difficult position, where they can't actually bring manufacturing locally to America. They won't be able to basically redevelop all of this locally in America. They need to find a middle ground. So what happened in the tariff conversation in 2018, 2019 was that they ended up basically just going, okay, cool, we'll do this one product here, right? So I would expect something similar to happen. But in the interim, all of these sort of underlying risks are starting to unwind. You're seeing that the share price in a lot of the manufacturers in China are also tanking, right? You're seeing Apple tanking, and you're also starting to see that they could be looking at a healthy retrace, 50 finally coming in for a healthy percent retrace, but that's still 34% away from current prices. So unless Trump changes his mind, or they're able to negotiate something over this long weekend period before the markets open on Tuesday next week, then you could see quite a lot more de-risking in this space. Another thing that they get, design and IP control, right? Does not own the factories, but it owns the product designs, all of that's cool. They also embed its own staff. So this is basically where all of that investment into training staff. So now all of your workforce is highly trained into how to build the phone. They're technologically advanced. They've got degrees. They've got all of this, and they're based in China and India, and not in America, right? Geopolitical hedging, right? So shifting supply chains faster, so they can move from China to India, but they're not going to move to America. I just don't see it happening, right? They also then avoiding political backlash from foreign ownership, right? So this comes out of them not actually taking shares in the companies, right? So I want us to just end off with the question, okay? Do you think that Apple is going to give in to Trump on this conversation? Like, okay, fine, we will move our entire manufacturing operation that we spent the last 10 years building in China and India and Vietnam and bring it to America, or are they going to find a way to buy time? And most likely they're going to find a way to buy time, even if that means in the short run hurting the share price of Apple. Because in the short run, hurting the share price of Apple is going to, in the long run, benefit Apple. If they're going to they're going to negotiate some kind of pause with Trump and say, okay, cool, give us time. And then from that, they're then going to say, well, let's maybe bring one new thing that we're making in China, we'll come and do it, and we'll put it in the same facility, or we'll move forward on our Texas operation. There's also conversations around them building a facility in Texas. Like, okay, we will start with that process. Let's get the architects out to start designing the plans. We are moving forward, Mr. Trump. Don't you worry. We'll get it all, and we'll get it all sorted shortly. And then with that, kind of stabilize, and you'll get some kind of handshake agreement similar to pretty much every other tariff situation that's happened to date. There's been only news, but not actually any sort of economic policy that's been passed. It's just handshakes, pauses, 90 days here, 90 days here, reduction there, pause. So you might see a lot more instability. Also, if Trump starts coming out and going after a lot of the other big corporates that are making these 4-year promises and trying to nail them down to doing things now instead of delaying till after the midterms where he knows he's likely going to lose some of his influence, then that could also bring a lot more instability into the market. So it's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. I want to just end off and bring up this chart again, right? So have a look at these companies, right? I want you to see as well, I want you to see this, right? Just want you to have a look again at this Apple stock, right? Now, look at how the majority, now that I showed you guys what these companies actually do for Apple, right? You could say that a $80 billion valuation in this company, when Apple is contributing such a large lion's share into the Chinese economy, all of those jobs, all of those factories that are currently getting staffed by in Asia, all of that development, all of that knowledge, all of that IP that's currently sitting in these companies, right? Now, this is basically also opening up some opportunity, because I don't see Apple moving out, right, of China or kind of disinvesting entirely and bringing it all to America only for 4 years from now. The Democrats come in and then it's a completely different ball game and all of the tariffs disappear. Pretty much like what happened when Trump went out last time and Biden came in, then he got rid of a bunch of the tariffs and went like, oh, we don't need that anymore. So I would be interested to keep an eye on the price action on these charts and actually see, can you start to see a shift in structure towards the upside, which could likely mean that there is potential for some kind of alleviation, right? Where you can start to see if price is starting to pick up here, then it might be that we are alleviating some of that risk, and that these, especially on High and on Pegatron Corporation, right? As long as these continue to bleed towards the downside, expect that it is likely because the production from Apple is significantly declining. So when you start to see a positive shift here as well, I would be more inclined to look at Apple if it was to have that dip down into this area over here, back to the 50, and finally have that 50% retrace, which is still around 30% from current price action, right? Until you actually start to see Apple shifting structure here towards the upside, or bottoming out into this zone, I wouldn't basically be looking to buy it on any sort of dip. Okay, so just some facts. I hope you guys enjoyed this version of the content and this kind of way of delivering it. If you stayed this long and you enjoyed it, then give it fire. If I get like 300 to 500 fires on this, I'll continue to do video form content in the Economic Edge reports. Otherwise, we can go back to the PDF documents and you guys can read them at your leisure. So yeah, just let me know what you think of this and hope you found it valuable. Cheers.